Hello. 2 months before our wedding, my fiancé said she wanted to figure out her feelings for a coworker. So I ended things and let them be together. Guess who came back 8 months later? My name is Le. I'm 33 and I work as a data scientist in Portland, Oregon. Most of my days are spent analyzing patterns, building models, and explaining complicated numbers to people who don't like math. The job pays well, and it also trains you to look at situations logically instead of emotionally. My fiancée, Emily, is 30 and works as a graphic designer for a branding agency. We had been together just over 3 years and engaged for 9 months. We were living together in a 2-bedroom apartment not far from downtown, and we're 2 months away from our wedding when this whole situation started. From the outside, our relationship looked stable. Wedding venue booked, deposits paid, invitations already mailed out. Her parents were helping with some of the costs, and my family had already bought plane tickets. Everything was moving forward exactly how it was supposed to. Emily also had a personality that I'd politely describe as strong-willed. Her version of communication was usually more like a performance. If something annoyed her, the whole room knew immediately. She liked to say she was just brutally honest, but most of the time it meant she enjoyed pushing conversations in whatever direction benefited her. Normally, I handled it fine. I'm a calm person. Working with data teaches you not to panic when something looks messy at first. But about 10 weeks before the wedding, something started changing. It began with her mentioning a coworker named Julian. At first, it sounded completely harmless, just normal work talk. Julian helped with the design project. Julian stayed late to help finish a client presentation. Julian apparently had the same sarcastic humor as her. I didn't think much of it. People talk about coworkers all the time. Then one Sunday afternoon, we were sitting at the kitchen table reviewing the wedding seating chart when she suddenly got this strange expression, the kind of look someone has when they've been rehearsing a speech in their head. She tapped her pen on the table a few times and said we needed to talk. That sentence alone already set off alarms. Emily had a habit of delivering conversations like she was announcing some dramatic plot twist. Then she said something that honestly sounded like it came from a bad relationship podcast. She told me she had been thinking a lot lately, thinking about life, thinking about marriage, thinking about whether she had explored all her feelings before settling down. And then she said the line that basically froze the entire conversation. She said she might have feelings for Julian, and she wanted time to figure them out. 2 months before our wedding. And the way she said it wasn't apologetic. If anything, she sounded slightly annoyed, like she expected me to calmly support her emotional self-discovery process while we had a fully planned wedding 10 weeks away. That's when I realized the conversation was not going to go the way she thought it would. For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking, not because the situation was funny, but because the timing was so ridiculous that my brain refused to process it as real. We had a wedding in 10 weeks. The venue is paid. Her dress was hanging in the closet. Half our weekends were already booked with planning meetings, and she was sitting across from me talking about exploring feelings for some guy from her office. So I asked the most basic question possible. What exactly does figuring out your feelings mean? Emily leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms like I was being intentionally difficult. She had this way of acting, like any request for clarification was some kind of personal attack. She said she just needed space to understand what she was feeling. Space meant spending time with Julian, talking to him, seeing where things went. The way she said it made it sound like she was describing a harmless coffee meetup, not the beginning of an emotional exit from our relationship. I asked how long she had been thinking about this. She shrugged. A few weeks. Apparently, they had been working closely on a big branding project. Late nights, brainstorming, sessions, inside jokes that slowly stopped being about work. According to her, Julian understood her creativity in a way most people didn't. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to.
No.
Because when someone starts describing another person like they're some rare emotional soulmate, the situation is already far past harmless. What made the whole conversation surreal was how casual she sounded. Emily didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like this conversation was an inconvenience she had to get through so she could continue whatever story she had already started in her head. Then she said something that actually made me laugh. Not a happy laugh, more like the kind of laugh people make when something is so absurd it breaks normal logic. She said she didn't want to cancel the wedding yet. She just wanted a little time to explore her feelings and then decide what felt right. In other words, she wanted to pause our relationship while she tested another one. And if that didn't work out, we could apparently just continue planning the wedding like nothing happened. She said it in the calmest voice imaginable, like she was suggesting we move dinner reservations to a different night. That was the moment something in my head clicked into place, because I work with probability models all day. And when someone asks for permission to try a different option while keeping the original one waiting safely in the background, the math behind that decision becomes very clear. She wasn't confused. She was shopping. And according to her plan, I was supposed to patiently wait on the shelf while she figured out if Julian was a better deal. Once the conversation ended, something strange happened. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel devastated either. What I mostly felt was clarity. When someone tells you they need time to explore feelings for another person 2 months before your wedding, that's not confusion. That's a decision that already happened. They're just asking for permission to avoid consequences. Emily seemed to think the conversation had created some kind of pause in our relationship, like we were now in a temporary holding pattern while she figured things out with Julian. But in my head, the relationship had already ended during that conversation at the kitchen table. She just didn't realize it yet. Later that evening, she left to meet a friend for drinks. At least, that's what she told me. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. At that point, I honestly didn't care enough to check. While she was gone, I opened my laptop and started going through the wedding planning folder, venue contract, catering agreement, photographer, deposit, DJ booking. There was about $30,000 tied up in that weekend. Some of it refundable, some of it not. I stared at the numbers for a while and thought about something my dad used to say, bad. Investments get worse when you refuse to. Cut losses early. So I started making phone calls. The first call was to the venue coordinator. I told her I needed to cancel the reservation for October. She paused for a second like she assumed I was joking. When she realized I was serious, she started explaining the cancellation terms. We would lose the initial deposit, but the remaining payments hadn't gone through yet. That alone saved almost $12,000. Next call was the caterer, then the florist, then the photographer. Most of the conversations were awkward, but surprisingly calm. Apparently, wedding cancellations 2 months out happen more often than people think. By the time I finished the last call, it was a little after 9 o'clock at night. Our wedding no longer existed. No venue, no catering, no music, just a stack of canceled contracts and one lost deposit. Emily still had no idea. She came home around 10:30 laughing about something on her phone. She walked into the living room, kicked off her shoes, and asked if I wanted to watch something before bed, like the conversation from earlier had been a minor scheduling discussion. I looked at her for a second and realized something that made the whole situation even more surreal. She genuinely believed I was waiting while she figured out if Julian was worth it. What she didn't know yet was that the decision she thought she was making had already been finalized, and the wedding she thought was still happening in 10 weeks had been gone for almost 2 hours. The next morning was when everything finally caught up with reality. Emily woke up around 8 o'clock and walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee. She looked completely normal, no stress, no guilt, just scrolling through her phone like it was any other weekday. She kissed my cheek and said she was going to meet Julian later to talk things through. She said it casually, like it was a normal step in this little emotional experiment she had created. That was the moment I decided the conversation couldn't wait any longer. I told her we needed to talk again. She sighed immediately, already irritated. Leo, I told you I just need a little time. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That was the first time she used that tone, the one that implied I was the unreasonable one for reacting to the situation she created. So I kept it simple. I told her the wedding had been canceled. At first, she just blinked at me like her brain didn't process the sentence. Then she laughed, not a happy laugh, the kind people do when they assume someone is exaggerating. What do you mean canceled? I explained exactly what I meant. The venue was gone. The caterer was gone. The photographer was gone. Everything had been canceled the night before. The color drained from her face. Her first reaction wasn't sadness. It was anger. You canceled our wedding. Without talking to me, I reminded her that she had just asked me for permission to date another man while we were engaged. Apparently, in her mind, those two things were not connected. She started pacing around the kitchen, running her hands through her hair. You're overreacting. I just said I needed time to figure things out. I nodded, and I gave you that time. Just not while living here and planning a wedding with me. That's when she finally realized where the conversation was going. Her expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Wait, what are you saying? I told her the relationship was over and that she needed to pack a bag and stay. somewhere else. The apartment lease was in my name. I'd been covering most of the rent anyway, so legally it wasn't complicated. Emily stared at me like I had just betrayed her. She actually asked if I was serious. The same person who had asked me to patiently wait while she explored feelings with another guy was shocked that I didn't want to continue the relationship. The argument that followed lasted about 15 minutes, mostly her accusing me of being dramatic. Eventually, I walked to the bedroom closet, grabbed one of her suitcases, and set it on the bed. I told her she could take whatever she needed for the next few days and figure out the rest later. She stood there frozen for a while. Then she said something that honestly summed up her entire mindset. She said she never thought I would react like this. That was the first honest thing she said during the entire situation, because she really hadn't. In her mind, I was supposed to wait quietly while she decided if Julian was a better option. Instead, she was standing in our bedroom packing a suitcase because the option she planned to come back to had just removed itself from the equation. Emily spent the next 20 minutes throwing clothes into the suitcase with a kind of aggressive energy people use when they want to look like the victim of a situation they created. Every few minutes, she would stop packing and start another argument. She kept saying the same things over and over. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're acting insecure. You're punishing me for being honest. I didn't bother arguing anymore. There was no point. The decision had already been made the night before when I canceled the wedding. Eventually, she zipped the suitcase shut and turned toward me with her arms crossed. So, what exactly am I supposed to do now? That question actually made the situation feel even more absurd, because from my perspective, the answer was obvious. You go stay with the guy you're trying to figure out your feelings for. I said it calmly. You can stay with Julian. For the first time that morning, she hesitated just for a second. Then she shook her head. That's not the point. Apparently, in her mind, Julian was still part of the exploration phase, not the consequence phase. She had expected to keep both options open. What she didn't expect was to suddenly have only one. I reminded her that she had already told me she planned to see him that day. Anyway, so the situation was actually very simple. You wanted space to explore that connection. Now you have it. She stared at me like I had just broken some invisible rule. You're really just kicking me out? I corrected her. You asked to pause our relationship while you test another one. I'm just finishing the sentence. That shut the conversation down for a moment. Emily grabbed the suitcase and rolled it into the living room. She stopped by the door and looked back at me. Her voice had changed now. Less confident, more uncertain. So, that's it. 3 years, and you're just done? That question actually irritated me a little, because from my perspective, the timeline she mentioned was exactly the reason this situation existed. 3 years together, and 2 months before our wedding, she decided she wanted to see if another guy might be better. So I gave her the most honest answer I could. You ended it yesterday. I'm just the one who noticed. She stood there quietly for a few seconds. Then she picked up her phone. I could see the screen light up. As she started typing, I didn't need to ask who she was messaging. A few minutes Later, she grabbed the suitcase handle. Again. Before walking out the door, she said one more thing. She said I was going to regret this, that once I cooled down, we would talk again and work things out like adults. Then she left the apartment, and just like that, my fiancé walked out the door to go stay with the guy she had wanted to explore her feelings with. At the time, she probably thought it was temporary. What she didn't realize yet was that from my perspective, the story had already ended. After Emily left, the apartment became very quiet, not the dramatic kind of silence you see in movies, just normal, quiet, the kind that happens when someone who usually fills the room with noise suddenly isn't there anymore. I sat on the couch for a few minutes and thought about the last 12 hours. The conversation about Julian, the canceled wedding, the suitcase by the door. Strangely enough, I still didn't feel angry. Mostly, I felt like a problem had been solved. When you work in data science long enough, you learn that some outcomes become obvious once enough variables appear, and once the result is clear, the only logical step is to act on it. So I started finishing the last piece of the situation. My phone was sitting on the coffee table. Emily had already sent 3 messages. The first one came about 15 minutes after she left. Leo, we need to talk later. When you calm down. The second one came about 10 minutes after that. You're making a huge mistake right now. The third message was shorter. I'm serious. Don't do something you'll regret. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I opened my contacts. Emily's number was still pinned at the top of my messages. 3 years of conversations sitting right there. Thousands of texts, photos, vacation plans, random inside jokes. All of it suddenly felt like archive data from a completed experiment. So I blocked the number. Then I blocked her on Instagram, then Facebook, then every other platform where she might try to start another conversation. It wasn't done out of anger. It was done because the relationship was finished and there was no reason to keep the communication channel open. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring. A minute later, another call came through. Different, unknown number. I let that one ring too. Then a text came from a third number. Emily again. Seriously, Leo, what are you doing? I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked that. Number 2. That was the moment the situation finally became real. Because Emily had always been used to controlling conversations. She was used to arguing until people backed down or compromised, but blocking someone removes the conversation entirely. No debate, no performance, no audience, just silence. And apparently silence was something she had never expected. Over the next hour, 3 more unknown numbers tried calling. Each one got blocked. Eventually, the phone stopped ringing. The apartment stayed quiet, and somewhere across the city, my former fiancé was probably sitting with Julian, realizing that the backup plan she assumed would always be there had just permanently disappeared. The next few days were quieter than I expected. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional breakdowns. Just a lot of administrative cleanup. Monday morning, I emailed the wedding website company and shut the page down. No reason to leave a countdown timer running for an event that no longer existed. Then I sent a short message to the few relatives who had already booked flights. I kept it simple. The wedding has been canceled. I'll explain later. Please cancel your travel plans. Most people didn't ask questions right away. My family has always been the type that understands when something serious has happened. Emily's side of the family was a different story. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone started lighting up with numbers I didn't recognize. Her sister called first, then her mom, then two of her friends. I let every call go to voicemail. Eventually, one of Emily's friends left a message that actually made me laugh. She said Emily told everyone we had a misunderstanding and that I had overreacted. Apparently, the story going around was that Emily had only mentioned a harmless crush and I had panicked and canceled the entire wedding. That version of events would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. When someone creates a disaster, the next step is usually controlling the narrative. I didn't bother correcting anyone. Anyone who really needed the truth would eventually hear it. The more interesting part came on Wednesday evening. I was cooking dinner when my mind buzzed with a text from an unknown number again. At first, I assumed it was Emily using another phone, but when I opened the message, the name at the bottom surprised me. Julian. The message was short. Hey, Leo, I think we should talk. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how things were going on their side, because confident people don't reach out to the ex-fiancé. People who feel like they've stepped into a mess usually do. I stared at the message for a moment while stirring the pasta on the stove. Then I typed a simple reply. There's nothing to talk about. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Emily's really upset. She didn't expect things to go this far. That line almost made me laugh out loud because it confirmed the exact assumption I had made from the beginning. Emily never thought she would lose anything. She thought she could explore a new relationship while keeping the old one waiting safely in the background. Now she was staying with Julian, and apparently the reality of the situation was finally catching up to her. Another message came through. She says you blocked her everywhere. I replied with a single sentence. That was intentional. Julian didn't respond for about a minute. Then the last message appeared. Man, I didn't realize you two were still that serious. That was the moment I understood something important. Emily had not been honest with him either, because anyone who knew the wedding was 10 weeks away would never describe the relationship as not that serious. After that message from Julian, I put my phone down and finished cooking dinner. The whole exchange lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it explained a lot. Emily had clearly told him a very different version of reality, because if he knew she was 2 months away from marrying someone, there's no way his message would have sounded that casual. I didn't reply again. Instead, I blocked his number 2, not because he mattered, but because I had no interest in getting pulled into whatever situation they were now dealing with. For the next few weeks, things settled into a strange kind of normal. Work stayed busy. My schedule filled up again. Without wedding, planning meetings, weekends suddenly felt wide open. Friends slowly started hearing what happened. Most reactions were the same. Shock first, then anger on my behalf. One of my friends summed it up perfectly during a dinner we had About a week later, he said, Emily basically tried to keep you as the safety net while she tested a new parachute. That was exactly it. About 3 weeks after everything ended, I ran into someone unexpected, one of Emily's coworkers. We had met once at a company holiday party the previous year. She recognized me in line at a coffee shop and immediately gave me that uncomfortable look people get when they know a situation is messy. We ended up talking for a few minutes. That conversation confirmed something interesting. Apparently, Emily and Julian had started seeing each other openly almost immediately after she moved out. But according to the coworker, things at the office had already become awkward because people there had known Emily was engaged, which meant the story she had told everyone outside the office was starting to fall apart inside the office, and situations like that rarely stay quiet for long. At that point, though, it didn't matter to me anymore. My life had already moved forward. I assumed Emily and Julian would either make it work or crash on their own. Either way, it was no longer my problem. At least that's what I believed at the time, because 8 months later, a name appeared on my phone screen that I hadn't seen since the day she moved out of my place. 8 months passed before I heard from Emily again. By that point, the whole situation felt like something from a previous chapter of my life. Work had gotten busy again. I had taken a short trip with friends. The apartment had been rearranged enough that it no longer looked like a place built for 2 people. Most importantly, the silence had stayed intact until one Tuesday evening. I was finishing up some work at my desk when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Normally, I ignore those, but this one started with my name. Leo, it's me. I already knew who it was before I opened the message. Emily. Apparently, she had found yet another number to contact me from. The next message came right after. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I really need to talk to you. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, mostly surprised it had taken this long, because situations like the one she created rarely end the way people expect. Curiosity got the better of me. So I asked one question. What do you want? Her reply came almost immediately. Can we meet somewhere? That alone told me enough. People who are happy in their current situation don't try to reconnect with the person they left 8 months earlier. I asked the obvious question, what happened to Julian? There was a long pause before she responded. Then the message appeared. We broke up. 3 simple words. Honestly, I wasn't shocked. Relationships that begin by blowing up. Another one usually have unstable foundations. Another message came through. I made a mistake, Leo. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and thought about the last time I saw her, standing in the doorway with a suitcase, telling me I would regret ending things. Now, 8 months later, she was asking to talk, which meant the experiment she wanted to run had already produced its results, and apparently, she didn't like the outcome. I didn't meet her. That was the first decision. Emily sent 3 more messages over the next hour asking if we could talk in person. She said she wanted to explain everything, said she had been doing a lot of thinking. I didn't need the explanation. The situation was already clear She left our relationship to explore one with Julian. Now that relationship was over, so she was circling back to the previous option. The logic behind it wasn't complicated. I finally sent one last message. I hope things work out for you, but there's nothing left to discuss, she replied. Almost instantly, Leo, please don't do this. I know I messed up, but we had 3 years together. That has to mean something. It did mean something, just not what she wanted it to mean now. 3 years meant I had already seen enough of who she was when things didn't go her way. I sent one final sentence. You already chose the life you wanted 8 months ago. Then I blocked that. Number 2, the conversation ended the same way the relationship did, quietly. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Emily had left her job and moved to another city. Apparently, things at her office became awkward. After everything with Julian, I never confirmed the details. By that point, it didn't matter. Sometimes people think relationships end because someone made a mistake, but mistakes usually happen once. What Emily did wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And once someone shows you exactly how easily they can replace you, the smartest thing you can do is make sure they never get the chance to try again. Bye-bye.